Campaigners have largely welcomed the confirmation that the government will offer £100,000 in interim compensation to victims of the infected blood scandal and their bereaved partners. But they say many people are still missing out. There are calls for more family members of those who've already died, such as children or parents, to be included in the interim scheme. This could be just the first stage of compensation payouts, as the inquiry into the scandal is still looking into whether more payments should be given to a greater number of people.
The contaminated blood scandal has been called the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS. It began in the mid-1970s and saw thousands of people with haemophilia and other blood disorders being given treatments which contained blood plasma which was contaminated with HIV and hepatitis. It led to thousands of people dying, and many more were left with life-threatening or life-limiting conditions. But today, the government has announced that many of those people will be getting compensation. Over 4,000 people who were victims of the contaminated blood scandal will get initial payments of £100,000. Perhaps this news feels very close to home for you because you or one of your loved ones have been directly affected by this. If you'd like to share your story with us, please do. You can email your comment and phone number to vine@bbc.co.uk or text us on 88291. In a moment, we'll speak to Ros Cooper, who was infected with hepatitis C as a child when she was being treated for a blood disorder. But first of all, let's find out more about today's announcement from BBC reporter Simon Dedmond. Simon, good afternoon to you. Could you give us an idea of the scale of the infected blood scandal, which has been going on for such a long time?
Well, it is, Vanessa, how you described the biggest medical treatment scandal in the NHS's history. We believe that around 30,000 people have been infected with contaminated blood over the 1970s and 1980s with the viruses like hepatitis and HIV. And these people didn't know that they had these viruses. Admittedly, at the time, there was very little knowledge about them, but there were very few checks on the quality of the blood and who the donors were. And for people who were haemophiliacs, who were receiving plasma donations because they needed something called factor VIII, which would help their blood clot. A lot of this came from the United States, where they were getting donors from prisons. Some of them were drug users who were being paid for their blood. And they had these viruses, and it went into these plasma products, and these were then passed on to donors here in the UK. And there would have also been other people who've had blood transfusions as well, who would have picked up one of these viruses. And then there have been many who then ended up having really debilitating conditions, physically, but also on their lives. They've lost their earning potentials. Some of them have lost their homes. Some of them have lost the ability to have children. So this has left a scar on many of their lives and their loved ones' lives. So after decades of campaigning, the government has decided to follow some other governments. The Republic of Ireland, Canada have already paid out compensation. Others, like Australia, the government there still hasn't, like us until today, done so either. So this is something that has affected people all around the world.
So how significant is this announcement by the government today? It's certainly taken, upwards of 5 decades to come. So how significant is it now?
It's a pretty big announcement. The chief executive of the Haemophilia Society has sort of said this is an indication that the government is showing that it's some liability for what has happened by giving compensation. There is a public inquiry that is still going on into this scandal. It's expected to conclude next year. But Sir Brian Langstaff, who's the chair of the inquiry, said last month that the government should make an interim payment quickly. There's a compelling case for it, as victims were, and indeed are, on borrowed time because of failing health. And 3 former secretaries of state for health also also joined him in saying that the government should make this announcement. So everyone across the UK, 4,000 victims and bereaved partners will be eligible for this money. In England, the payments will be made at the end of October, and then the other devolved administrations of Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland will also be making the payments at some point as well.
What do we know so far about the way in which victims of the scandal and their families have responded? Because we hear that not everyone affected will be compensated. So who are those people who are going to be left out then?
Well, the people who are going to be left out are essentially parents who lost children and children who lost parents. They will not get compensation as part of this. And I think in some ways that's why some of the people who are receiving it almost see this announcement as bittersweet. It's a very good first step, they kind of feel, but they feel in some respects a sense of guilt that there are others who've been affected by this who will not be getting money today. Now, perhaps one of the key bits in the government's announcement is the word interim. This is interim compensation. It is expected, perhaps also likely, that there will be further payments once the inquiry ends into this scandal, which, as I say, is expected to be next year. There could be more payments to come for those who are already receiving this money, but also for some of these people who have been left out today.
Thank you very much indeed for filling us in, Simon. Let's move on to Ros Cooper. Ros, good afternoon, and thank you for talking to us today.
Hi, Vanessa. Thank you for asking me.
So you were infected with hepatitis C when you were just a little girl. So can you tell us how that happened?
Well, I was diagnosed with a bleeding disorder, a bit like haemophilia, called von Willebrand's disorder. Mm-hmm. That was when I was 8 months old. And from then on, I was probably up at the hospital maybe once a week, maybe more often than that. Every time something happened, I injured myself, I would need a transfusion of clotting factor. Right. So I'd go up to the hospital, get an injection. That would kind of help my blood to clot, and then I was fine until the next episode. So I had hundreds of injections when I was growing up. And when those products were made from multiple blood donations, every single one of them was infected with hepatitis C, and that's what I was infected with as a child. I was very lucky not to get HIV, given the amount of treatment I received. Yes. And I am grateful for that, which might sound a bit strange. But I didn't find out about it till I was 19.
Does that mean that you were in good health apart from the issue with your blood clotting, that you didn't have any reason to think that you were ill? So what happened? Yes. How did you end up finding out about it then when you were 19, Rosamund?
I'd gone for an operation on my ankle because I'd got ankle joint problems. To a completely different hospital, to my regular hospital. And obviously you have a relationship with your regular haematology specialist. Yeah. So I'd been referred to a completely different hospital who mentioned the fact I had hepatitis C in passing, as if I knew. So that was how I found out, which was obviously
So tell me
shock.
about that, because obviously you hadn't known. You were busily going in and out of hospital every 5 minutes for these clotting situations, but you didn't know that you had hepatitis C. How did finding that out then affect the rest of your life? Because it's been a huge deal, hasn't it, for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had a significant bleeding disorder. I lived with that. By that point, I was treating myself, so I'd got some independence. I'd gone to university at this point, so I was looking forward to a good life, effectively. Yeah. Finding out I'd got the hepatitis C, and the way I found out as well, was very traumatic. I then had to face the fact that actually I could die from this, and I could die pretty soon. And not long after that, I was seeing friends of mine, because we're a small community within the bleeding disorder community, I was seeing friends of mine getting seriously ill with liver failure, and that was my future being sort of borne out in front of me. So from that moment on, it was extremely difficult. I found it very difficult to find a relationship, because I felt like I had to be honest about this. I couldn't go into a relationship and say, well, I'm here forever, because I had no idea what the future held. I managed to pass my degree and get into work, and I worked my way up so far. But then I was advised to have hepatitis C treatment, which was incredibly toxic, really, really difficult. And the treatment had a lasting effect on me. The treatment itself made it so that I couldn't work. And after a number of years of trying to continue working and really trying, because I really valued the fact that I'd overcome my health problems to get into work,
Yes.
I then had to face the fact that I wasn't able to continue doing that.
May I ask, sorry, forgive me for interrupting, but looking back, was it right that you did undertake such serious and toxic treatment, or would there have been an option of not having that treatment?
That's a good question. At that time, what I was being told from the tests they were doing was that my liver was not actually in too bad a condition. And that was the argument they gave me for doing the toxic treatment. But what I was doing, by that point, I'd met somebody, we'd got married, we were wanting to have a family, and it wasn't happening. So we went through a lot of fertility treatment to try and conceive. This was after the hepatitis treatment, because I felt it was important to try and rid myself of the hepatitis C before having a child, for the risk of passing it on to the child. So I did the treatment, which made me very ill. We then continued to try, because I was at that point clear of hepatitis C. However, it didn't work out. What I've since discovered, Vanessa, is that the treatment itself has quite likely made me infertile.
Oh, dear.
And if I'd have known that, because everybody knew, the doctors and nurses knew that that was my motivation for doing the treatment at that time, I could have waited. I had time to wait for the treatments that are around and have been around for the last sort of 5 to 10 years, which would not have had the same effect. But of course, I just went with the doctor's advice.
So this really has had an incalculable effect, really, upon every aspect of your life, all the important ones, really, hasn't it? Work and having children and, feeling confidence in the future and all the sorts of things that matter most to everybody. And I'm so sorry for what you've been through, Rosamond, honestly.
Thank you.
Are you eligible for this compensation, this £100,000?
I am, yes.
And how do you feel about it? I mean, I'm sure some people listening will just think, it's money. How could it make Rosamond feel any better about all that she's lost and all that she's suffered? But I don't know whether you will be able to use it to have some kind of experiences which will be great and which will be life affirming. I just don't know. What are you thinking about it?
Well, I'm quite emotional about it, actually. I didn't. It's really difficult, because on the one hand, it's a vindication of the fact I've been involved with campaigning to try and get answers, get truth, get a public inquiry since I was in my 20s. So the fact that we've got a public inquiry, the fact that Sir Brian Langstaff has backed this call for an interim payment because it's so desperately needed is phenomenal. And I'm so grateful that he's done that, and the work the inquiry is doing to expose the truth of the matter. But at the same time, I do feel, as your reporter stated, an incredible sense of guilt. I feel a massive amount of guilt for those who we've lost over the years. I feel a huge amount of guilt for the people that have had nothing, friends of mine whose parents both died because of this when they were little. Friends of mine that I played with at the hospital in the waiting room when we were about to get our injections. My mum and dad knew their parents. They lost their child. So it's very difficult.
Is there any chance that there will be a rethink on that particular side of things, that people who lost children and children who lost parents might receive compensation, or is this a final no to that?
I would say this is definitely not a final no, but I would like confirmation from the government that what they intend to do is fully implement Sir Robert Francis QC's report that he did for them on a framework for compensation, in which he did actually cover all eventualities, from parents to children to siblings, and he explained how a framework could be set up to actually assess the loss, the suffering of everyone involved, and this is part of those recommendations. So what I would like is an assurance from the government that they are going to actually start looking to put that framework in place, so that when Sir Brian and the team doing the inquiry finish their work, that if the recommendation's there, then we don't have to start doing the work then to set up a framework that might take a couple of years, because people need this help as soon as possible.
Rosamond, thank you for telling your story, and I do hope that you do get some peace of mind along with the money, and also some sense of satisfaction at last of having brought about what you've been campaigning for a whole lifetime long. Thank you very, very much indeed. And lovely listener, if this really resonates with you because you have been affected by this particular scandal, then do get in touch. 88291.
And on the pitch.
England, European champions!
Our place is everywhere.
History makers, record breakers, game changers.
This is our BBC.
And Rob is on the line. Hello, Rob. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Vanessa. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. And just like our former interviewee, you contracted hepatitis C in 1974. You were just 11 years old. So what were you doing in hospital at that point? What was happening?
So basically, age 10, I had appendicitis. A couple of weeks later, I turned 11, felt really bad, got taken back into hospital. 1 o'clock for a little while, and then I found out that they had left 3 dressings inside me during the appendicitis operation, and I needed 7 life-saving operations, each over 9 hours long. During one of those, they then left a latex glove inside me and had just over 100 pints of blood, at least one of which was infected. So that's why I was in hospital originally.
Yes.
Didn't know too much about it, other than I have a letter. I was really lucky. I have a letter from the hospital to my GP, my paediatrician at the time, just give him an update. And he basically said, Rob contracted jaundice last week as a result of more bad blood being given. That's the words on the letter, on an NHS letter, and it's dated the 9th of September 1974. I never saw this letter. 2006 came along. I'm quite happy at home. I get a phone call from my ex-GP. I've moved out the area. He said, Rob, I need to see you quite quickly. It's a bit odd. Met up with a guy. He said, I've got a letter that I've been instructed to destroy. Here it is. And lo and behold, I met him in a coffee shop. He handed me this letter, and it's as clear as day.
And tell me.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I can't have every year of your life, although all of it just sounds just so troubled and so difficult. But in a nutshell, because of time constraints, what's the rest of your life been like since that terrible time?
I was diagnosed as having Hep C in 2006.
Yeah.
I was due to go on holiday. I had to have inoculations. They did a test, found out I had hepatitis. Literally 2 hours before I'm due to leave for the airport, my GP phoned, different GP this time, said, I need to see you quickly. When I saw him, he said, you got Hep C. I didn't know what Hep C was. He then said, basically, you're going to die within a year. They were his words, just like that. And he said, avoid drink. And I'm like, you're having a laugh. I'm about to go on holiday to Cuba. I'm going to have a drink. You told me I'm going to die within the year. I came back. He called me again and knew the day I was coming back. He said, you're really lucky you've been accepted on a trial drug treatment. As the previous caller mentioned, this toxic drug is basically interferon. We had to take 2 pills a day, inject ourselves in the stomach once a week for 6 months. 1,000 of us went on the trial. 940 people died on the trial, including Anita Roderick, the body shop owner.
Anita Roderick, of course. She was an actual friend of mine. Yes, of course, it's all flooding back.
Yes. Brain hemorrhage.
Oh gosh.
Now, what we were then told at the end of it, if you had 2 dice, you're playing the game, 2 dice, you roll the dice twice a day. If you do not get a double, every time you roll the dice, you die. And you do that twice a day for 6 months, non-stop. That was the odds that we had. So the people that have survived are pretty lucky at the best.
Tell me something. Are you now in line for this £100,000 interim compensation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am.
And I mean, I bet your thoughts about that are extremely many and complex, aren't they? At this stage, they must be.
Yeah. But the reality is, first of all, I'm grateful for the 100k. That is going to help. It's going to help far more than knowing who made the decision in 1973.
Yeah.
The other thing that everyone seems to be missing, with the exception of the odd person, yourself included, which I'm grateful that you've realised this is an interim payment. During the recommendations, he went through absolutely everything that, my mum and, if my dad was alive, would be in line, my sister will be in line, etc., because I was taken away from the family unit, and therefore my parents were taken away, and my young sister was, denied having parents.
Yes.
For a period of time. But the main part of this is on July the 12th this year, Sir Robert Francis stood up on my birthday, which was very good, and he said, we need to capture as many people as quickly as we can with this 100,000 interim payment. So he said, let's just take, as the first step, everyone that's already registered and accepted on the various support schemes, EBIS or the Welsh or the Scottish versions or the Northern Irish version. And at least that way we can capture a number of people really quickly. Then, once we've captured those people, we'll then look into all of the other people who are not currently on this support scheme, and then we can then mop up afterwards. Yeah. But at least this way we capture the majority in the easiest and the shortest quick fix. That's how it is.
Rob, I thank you for calling. Honestly, what you've only been through, we could take a whole show, couldn't we? And then we'd still not even touch the sides on your story. Thank you very much indeed for calling. Really appreciate it.